The church tower rose above the Tuscan village, like a silent sentinel stone and mortar, centuries old, overlooking the snow-dusted rooftops of Colonia. Inside its upper room, a young lieutenant watched through binoculars as 800 German soldiers swept up the mountain. He had one radio, he had one choice, and he had one final message for the artillery battery miles behind the lines. "Fire it," he said. "There's more of them than there are of us. Give them hell." The shells fell, the tower collapsed, and when the smoke cleared, 100 German soldiers lay dead beside him. This is the story of First Lieutenant John R. Fox of the 598th Field Artillery Battalion, and what he did on the morning of December 26, 1944, in a tiny Italian village, would become one of the most extraordinary acts of sacrifice in the history of the United States Army. The date was December 26, 1944, Boxing Day, the day after Christmas. The place was the Serchio River Valley in northern Italy, a rugged mountainous region near the Gothic Line, the last major German defensive position in the Italian campaign. For weeks, the American Fifth Army had been pushing north toward the Po Valley, but the winter had brought everything to a halt: cold, rain, snow, and a determined enemy who refused to yield. The 92nd Infantry Division, the Buffalo Soldiers, held a section of the line near the villages of Barga and Colonia. It was the only all-black infantry division to fight in combat in Europe during World War II, and they had arrived in Italy just weeks earlier, on December 9, 1944. They were inexperienced, under-equipped, and facing an enemy that had been fighting for years. And on Christmas morning, they had no idea that the Germans were preparing to strike. John Robert Fox was born on May 18, 1915, in Cincinnati, Ohio, the eldest of 3 sons. He grew up in a nation that treated him as a second-class citizen: segregation, discrimination, limited opportunity. But his family valued education, and Fox excelled in school. He attended the Ohio State University before transferring to Wilberforce University, a historically black college near Xenia, Ohio. There, he joined the Reserve Officers Training Corps under Captain Aaron R. Fisher, a highly decorated World War I veteran who became a mentor to many young black officers. Fox studied engineering, learned the arts of leadership and artillery, and graduated in 1941 with a commission as a second lieutenant in the United States Army. The Army Fox entered was strictly segregated by law, by policy, by custom. Black soldiers served in black units, led by black officers and often white ones, and were frequently assigned to support roles rather than combat. The prevailing belief among many in the War Department was that black soldiers could not fight a prejudice that would be shattered by the performance of units like the 92nd and 93rd Infantry Divisions. Fox was assigned to the 92nd Infantry Division, reactivated in October 1942 at Fort Huachuca, Arizona. He trained as a forward observer with the 598th Field Artillery Battalion, learning the precise and dangerous art of calling in artillery fire from forward positions, often exposed, often alone, often behind enemy lines. For 2 years, Fox trained while the Army debated whether to commit black combat troops to the front lines. Finally, in July 1944, the 92nd Division deployed to Italy. They arrived in a theater that had been fighting since 1943: Salerno, Anzio, Cassino, Rome, and were thrown immediately into the line. The Italian campaign was a brutal, grinding affair. The terrain was mountainous, the weather miserable, and the Germans fought with skill and determination. By December, the 92nd had pushed into the Serchio River Valley, a quiet sector where the front lines stabilized for the winter. On December 23rd, 3 days before Christmas, Fox volunteered for a mission. He would lead a small forward observer party into the village of Colonia, perched on a mountainside overlooking the valley. Their job was to observe German movements and direct artillery fire if necessary. The village was held by about 70 black soldiers of the 92nd Division and 25 Italian partisans, local men who had joined the fight against the Germans. It was supposed to be a 4-day mission, quiet, routine. Fox would be back with his unit by December 27th. But the Germans had other plans. Unknown to American intelligence, Field Marshal Albert Kesselring had authorized a limited offensive in the Serchio Valley Operation WWII, Winter Storm. Its objective was to retake the high ground around Barga and Somma-Colonia, disrupt the American line, and possibly capture the port city of Livorno. The attacking force was substantial. The German 148th Infantry Division, reinforced by the Italian 51st Corpo di Armata Alpinos elite mountain troops, trained for winter warfare. In total, some 800 soldiers, many of them veterans of the Eastern Front, prepared to strike the thinly held American line. They chose Christmas Day to begin their infiltration. Christmas Day in Somma-Colonia dawned cold and quiet. The villagers celebrated as best they could a mass at the ancient church, small gatherings in stone houses, the quiet hope that the war might end soon. The American soldiers shared what rations they had, exchanged small gifts, and tried to forget that they were surrounded by enemies. Fox spent the day in his observation post, a room on the second floor of a house overlooking the village. From his window, he could see the valleys spread out below the Serchio River winding through the plain, the snow-covered peaks beyond, the roads and trails that led up the mountain. It was peaceful, deceptively peaceful. That night, the Germans began to move. They infiltrated the village in civilian clothes, German soldiers disguised as refugees, as peasants, as anyone who might not be noticed in the darkness. They slipped past the American outposts, blended with the civilian population, and took up positions throughout Somma-Colonia. By early morning, the village was largely in enemy hands. At approximately 0400 hours on December 26th, the Germans launched their attack. It began with artillery, a heavy barrage that slammed into the American positions, shaking the houses, collapsing walls, killing men in their sleep. Shell after shell crashed down as the German gunners, who had registered every target weeks in advance, poured fire into the village. Then the infantry came. The 70 Buffalo soldiers and 25 Italian partisans were vastly outnumbered, perhaps 8-1. They fought anyway. From houses, from behind stone walls, from the church itself, they poured fire into the advancing Germans. The fighting was house to house, hand to hand, brutal and immediate. Men died in doorways, in alleys, in the frozen streets. But they could not hold. The American commander made the only decision possible: withdraw. Ordering a retreat, he told his men to fall back down the mountain, to regroup with reinforcements to fight another day. The survivors began to pull out, carrying their wounded, covering each other's withdrawal. But Fox and his observer party did not go. They volunteered to stay behind. From his position on the second floor of a house, Fox continued to direct artillery fire. He radioed the 598th Field Artillery Battalion, miles behind the lines, and called in mission after mission. Shells arced over the mountains, crashing into the German formations, slowing their advance, killing scores of enemy soldiers. The Germans pressed forward. Fox adjusted the fire closer. He gave coordinates that brought the shells within 100 yards of his position. His commander, listening on the radio, protested. That was too close. The barrage would be too dangerous. That was just where I wanted it, Fox replied. Bring it in 60 yards. The commander hesitated. Fox, there's a heavy barrage in the area. The bombardment will be too close. Fox insisted. The Germans were in the streets. They were attacking in strength. The shells needed to fall exactly where he directed. The commander relented. The fire mission continued. The Germans kept coming. They had surrounded the village now, pouring in from every direction. Fox's party was isolated, cut off, with no hope of escape. The house where they sheltered was taking fire from multiple sides, rifle rounds smacking into the stone walls, machine guns raking the windows, grenades exploding in the street below. Fox's next call was calm, professional, but deadly serious. He gave the coordinates for another adjustment. The shells would land even closer, right on top of his position. His commander, a close friend named Lieutenant Otis Zachary, understood immediately what Fox was asking. He protested again desperately. "Fox, that will be on you." The radio crackled. Fox's voice came through one last time. "Fire it," he said. "There's more of them than there are of us. Give them hell." Zachary gave the order. The 155mm howitzers of the 598th Field Artillery fired their final mission. The shells arced high over the Tuscan hills, great steel projectiles, weighing nearly 100 pounds each, packed with high explosive, descending on a trajectory that would bring them down precisely on the coordinates Fox had given. At the forward observation post, Fox and his party waited. Perhaps they heard the shells coming, a whistling sound, growing louder, that signaled death from above. Perhaps they simply knew, with the certainty of soldiers who had directed fire before, that this was the end. The first shell struck the house. The explosion demolished the upper floor, collapsing walls, shattering the roof, filling the room with smoke and flame and flying debris. Fox was killed instantly along with every member of his observation party. The second shell landed in the street, where German soldiers had massed for the final assault. The third struck another group of attackers. The fourth, the fifth, the sixth, round after round, the artillery rained down on Somma-Colonia, turning the village into a cauldron of death. When the barrage finally ceased, silence fell over the mountain. The German attack had stalled. The survivors, stunned by the violence of the bombardment, pulled back to regroup. Fox's sacrifice had bought precious time for the withdrawing American forces to reorganize, time for reinforcements to arrive. It's time to save the lives of men who would otherwise have died. It would be days before anyone could return to Somma-Colonia. The village remained in German hands for nearly a week. The 92nd Infantry Division, reinforced and reorganized, launched a counterattack on January 1, 1945, driving the Germans from the mountain and retaking the village. When American soldiers entered the ruins of Somma-Colonia, they searched for their missing comrades. They found Fox in the rubble of the house where he had made his last stand. Around him, in a rough semicircle, lay the bodies of approximately 100 German soldiers. The artillery fire he had called down on his own position had killed them all, ripping apart the assault, shattering the attack, saving countless American lives. The Italian partisans who had fought alongside the Americans were also found. 8 of them had died with Fox, buried in the same rubble, their sacrifice intertwined with his. The villagers of Somma-Colonia would never forget. They had witnessed something extraordinary, a man who chose to die so that others might live, a stranger from across the ocean who gave his last full measure for their freedom. Fox's body was recovered, identified, and prepared for burial. He was 29 years old. He left behind a wife, Arlene, whom he had married before deploying overseas. She would wait more than 50 years to see him honored as he deserved. For decades after the war, John Fox's sacrifice went largely unrecognized. He was buried in Colebrook Cemetery in Whitman, Massachusetts, with a simple marker. His name appeared on casualty lists, but no medal was recommended. No citation was written. The Army, in the chaotic aftermath of war, simply moved on. But the people of Somma-Colonia did not forget. After the war, the citizens of this tiny Tuscan village erected a monument to the 9 men who died in the artillery barrage, 8 Italian soldiers and Lieutenant John Fox. They placed it near the church tower, overlooking the valley Fox had died defending. Every year, on December 26th, they gathered to remember. In the early 1980s, the Pentagon began a review of Distinguished Service Cross awards to determine if any black soldiers had been denied the Medal of Honor due to racial discrimination. Fox's name came up. His actions at Somma-Colonia were clearly worthy of the highest award. On April 15, 1982, Fox was posthumously awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. It was an honor, but it was not enough. In 1993, President Bill Clinton ordered the Department of Defense to conduct a comprehensive review of African American soldiers in World War II. The Army commissioned Shaw University in Raleigh, North Carolina, to research the question, had black soldiers been systematically denied consideration for the Medal of Honor? The study, completed in 1996, found that racial discrimination had indeed infected the awards process. It recommended that 10 African American veterans be considered for the Medal of Honor. 7 were approved. John Fox was one of them. On January 13, 1997, 52 years after his death, President Clinton presented the Medal of Honor to Arlene Fox in a White House ceremony. She accepted it on behalf of the husband she had lost so long ago. In her remarks, she said, "I think it sends a message to all, like a little wake-up call, that when a man does his duty, his color isn't important." Fox's Medal of Honor citation tells the story in the stark language of official recognition. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty, Lieutenant Fox and members of his observer party voluntarily remained on the second floor of a house, directing defensive fires. Lieutenant Fox reported at 0800 hours that the Germans were in the streets and attacking in strength. He called for artillery fire increasingly close to his own position. Finally, he was warned that the next adjustment would bring the deadly artillery right on top of his position. After acknowledging the danger, Lieutenant Fox insisted that the last adjustment be fired, as this was the only way to defeat the attacking soldiers. Today, Fox's sacrifice is commemorated on both sides of the Atlantic. In Somacolonia, a peace park was dedicated on July 16, 2000, in memory of Fox and his unit. The memorial stands near the church tower, a place of pilgrimage for those who know his story. Italian schoolchildren learn his name. Villagers tend the site with reverence. In the United States, American Legion Post 631 in Cincinnati bears his name. The G.I. Joe Medal of Honor series included a 12-inch action figure of Fox in 2005, introducing a new generation to his heroism. The National Museum of the United States Army features his biography, ensuring that his story will never be forgotten. Fox was one of 7 African American soldiers to receive the Medal of Honor in 1997, the only black Americans to be awarded the nation's highest honor for World War II. The others included Vernon Baker, who was present at the White House ceremony, the only one of the 7 still alive. The question remains, why did it take so long? The answer lies in the systemic racism of mid-century America, a military that segregated its soldiers, a nation that denied full citizenship to black veterans, an awards process that simply did not see black heroism as worthy of the highest recognition. Fox's story is a reminder that courage knows no color, but honor sometimes requires time to catch up. In the end, what matters is what Fox did on that cold December morning. Surrounded, outnumbered with no hope of escape, he made a choice. He chose his men over himself. He chose duty over survival. He chose to die so that others might live. And in doing so, he became something more than a soldier. He became a symbol of sacrifice, of courage, of the enduring truth that heroism has no race, no color, no boundaries. On December 26, 1944, in a tiny Italian village called Somacolonia, First Lieutenant John Fox sat in a stone house and watched 800 German soldiers sweep up the mountain. He had one radio, he had one choice. He chose to call fire on his own position. "Fire it," he said. "There's more of them than there are of us. Give them hell." The shells fell, the house collapsed, and when the smoke cleared, 100 German soldiers lay dead beside him. They called him a Buffalo Soldier. They called him a hero. They called him, 50 years later, a recipient of the Medal of Honor. But in that moment in that room, with the shells inbound and death seconds away, he was simply a man doing his duty. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to WW2 Folders as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.